tardes tengan todos ustedes. Te saluda Judith Barriga de CRT en español. Y como every other week o cada otra semana estamos con Johnson and Nichols hablando acerca de temas legales. Hoy vamos a hablar de uno de los departamentos que cuenta esta firma de abogados, que son derechos familiares o casos familiares. Así que si tienes alguna pregunta acerca de divorcios, acerca de separación legal, pueden llamar a las oficinas del abogado. Allí están los números de teléfono 704-457-5094 o también el día de hoy pueden mandar sus preguntas aquí con la abogada. Hoy vamos a ir un poquito inglés-español, back and forth, así que por favor tengan un poco de paciencia, pero muy importante, si tienen ustedes sus preguntas, custodia, patria potestad es lo mismo, pero custodia, patria potestad, el dinero que te dan, si tienes derecho o no, me puedo divorciar, ¿qué necesito para divorciarme? Todas esas preguntas lo pueden mandar. Así que, bueno, welcome, Elaine, Ms. Nicholson. I was just doing a quick introduction, letting them know that Johnson and Nicholson also has a department or has, one office that takes care of this, like family cases, which is like divorce, custody. But you tell me, what is actually family cases? What kind of cases do you take?
So family cases would be considered child support, child custody, and divorce. So anything around kind of the family relationship. Within the divorce context, you're also talking about division of marital property and if there's anything like spousal support. So all of that would fall under the family law umbrella.
Para estar seguro, le preguntaba a la abogada de qué se trata los casos familiares. Y como les dije, es cualquier cosa que tenga que ver con divorcio, con manutención o con la custodia de los niños. ¿Tienes alguna pregunta, acerca de esto? Ella te puede ayudar, como nos explicó, o más bien envuelve cualquier cosa que tenga que ver con la división de propiedades, si es que hay alguna, y ese tipo de cosas. Así que, I don't remember what was the last time that we talked and what was the topic, but let's talk about custody, because lately it has, it's sad, and I don't want to take it in the pandemic, but we have a lot of divorce, just as we have a lot of pregnancies as well with the pandemic. And a lot of people are asking me about custody, like, where do I go to ask custody, for my child? Do I have the right? I have a friend, and it's going to be sad to say that she's an American citizen. The baby father is not, and she was like, well, he doesn't have a right to ask her to do anything. So I want to clarify on that. What are the rights on the people, and how do you do this the right way?
Okay, so the legal status of either parent is not relevant when it comes to filing for any issues around children, child custody or support. So the court's not concerned with legal status from the perspective of whether a particular parent has the right to petition the court for custody of a child or child support.
El estatus legal de un padre no tiene que ver absolutamente nada para poder tener derecho de pedir la custodia por tu hijo. Así que no importa cuál es el estatus legal de la pareja, cualquiera de los dos puede pedir la patria potestad del niño.
So, I mean, where, an issue of a person's legal status could come into play could be where the discussion is around, well, what could potentially happen to a child who's in the custody of a parent who is here undocumented? Suppose that parent gets arrested, what happens to the child? So I'm not trying to say that legal status isn't relevant at all in those discussions, but it's certainly not relevant when it comes to, does a particular parent have the right to file for custody? And I'm going to pause, Judith, so you can go ahead and translate.
Ahí estamos las dos. Lo que está diciendo la abogada es que ella no quiere decir que el estatus legal de una persona no es completamente irrelevante a la petición de un niño, porque sí hay que pensar un poco qué es lo que se tendría que hacer en caso de que el padre sea arrestado o deportado. Pero eso nos lo va a explicar y vamos a hablar poco a poco de cuáles son los pasos y las precauciones que se tienen que tomar.
I also see legal status being relevant when it comes to something like child support, because You know, I have individuals that'll come to me wanting to get child support from another parent. And I'll say, well, does that other parent at least have a social security number so we can, you know, find them in the system, find out if they're, you know, how much they're being paid. And a lot of times, if a parent doesn't have a social security number and or they're being paid under the table, those kinds of child support cases are a little more difficult because you can't always find that person's income. Where are they working? How much are they earning? So that's another situation where legal status might impact a case, but again, it doesn't prevent you from filing a case to begin with.
Otra de las partes o circunstancias en donde la abogada puede darse cuenta que el estatus legal de una pareja o en la petición de un niño tiene es cuando se pide la manutención. Usualmente, si una persona tiene un seguro social, pues se puede buscar cómo se han llenado los taxes y cuánto es el dinero que gana. Es fácil encontrarlo simplemente con el número social, pero si no tiene un número de seguro social, entonces es un poquito más difícil poder encontrar récords de cuánto dinero está ganando o cuánto es la cantidad justa que se tiene que dar. Pero una vez más, y repite, el que esto no es un impedimento para poder pedir o llenar una forma pidiendo patria potestad o manutención.
Okay. Another thing that's important to keep in mind when it comes to any kind of a family law matter, we need to be able to find the other person. We need to know where the ex-husband lives, the children's father lives, the children's mother, whoever is the defendant in that case. We need to be able to locate that person because they have to formally be served with legal papers. So if you don't know where the father is or where the mother is, you haven't heard from them in 5 years, it also makes these kinds of cases challenging because if we can't find them, we can't serve them. And if we can't serve them, we can't move forward with a legal case within our legal system here in North Carolina.
Otra cosa importante, si vas a hacer o quieres pedir la custodia completa de tu hijo, es saber, y que es importante en cualquier tipo de caso familiar, es poder localizar a la otra persona, ya sea tu esposo, ex esposo, el padre de tus hijos, para poderlos servir o darles la noticia del efecto legal que está a punto de saber. Entonces, un poquito difícil, hoy encuentro un poquito difícil poder seguir con estos casos cuando no se puede localizar. No importa que tengas 5 años o lo que sea, se tiene que localizar para hacerlo saber. Before we move forward with this topic, I want to step a little bit on what you said. It doesn't matter if you haven't seen him for 5 years or 10 years or he never met the baby or whatever, you know, but the day that they sign up the birth certificate and that's it. It's important for me to ask custody even though the father has never been present.
That's an excellent question. And the answer is yes, because it could be for a number of reasons. A lot of my clients want to get a passport, for example, for their child. And both parents have to sign off on a passport application here in the United States. And I believe that's the same in a lot of other countries. So if you can't find that person for purposes of a U.S. passport, the only other thing, they're limited exception, you have to have the father. One of the exceptions is if you have sole custody of the child. So sometimes for purposes of getting a passport or for some other benefit, you may need to get some kind of legal document showing that you have sole custody of the child.
Una de las cosas por las que la abogada recomienda que a pesar de que tengas años sin saber absolutamente nada del papá de tu hijo o ni siquiera lo conozca, pero está en el certificado de nacimiento, es porque cuando llegue el momento que quieras solicitar un pasaporte, los dos padres tienen que firmar ese pasaporte. Sin esa firma simplemente no puedes hacer la petición. Hay sus excepciones y la excepción es cuando tienes la custodia completa de tus hijos. Así que por eso es importante saber en dónde está. So what do we do if we don't or we can locate this person?
So what I do a lot of times is I'll ask my clients, well, are they in the United States? Can you ask around? Can you ask, a lot of times these individuals know people in common. So they may ask around and say, oh, I heard he was in Houston, Texas. I don't have an address, but I know that that's where he is because that's where I heard from his cousin. So we can do what's called service by publication. So as long as we have a city and a state here in the United States, we can serve an individual by publication, meaning printing a copy of the legal notice in the newspaper. And for purposes of the law, that's intended to give the defendant notice that somebody's filed a legal action against him or her. So in this country, we are permitted to do that. It gets a little more complicated with service by publication in other countries for a number of reasons, especially during COVID. A lot of foreign newspapers went to online publication. And so I'm doing legal research now to see if there's an exception. Does it have to be run in a print newspaper, or can it be published online? I'm hesitant to do, to go with a newspaper that prints online, but it gets more complicated once we leave the United States in terms of serving someone by publication.
Le preguntaba yo a la abogada, y para los que se están apenas conectando, estamos hablando de leyes familiares o casos familiares, específicamente en estos instantes acerca de la custodia de un niño cuando yo no tengo papeles o cuando una de las personas no tiene un estatus legal en los Estados Unidos. Le preguntábamos a la abogada, ¿qué pasa si tengo años que yo no sé dónde está el papá o qué es lo que mi pareja, expareja? Y bueno, si no lo logramos localizar, dice, bueno, usualmente tenemos gente conocida entre unos y otros. Podemos preguntar, oye, ¿sabes dónde fue la última vez que supieron de fulanita o de perenganita? Y lo que se puede hacer es publicación impresa. Se puede servir a través de un periódico dentro de los Estados Unidos. Por decir, si dicen la última vez que supimos que él estaba viviendo en Texas, pero no tenemos una dirección, entonces se va a hacer en una publicación en Texas para, por lo menos públicamente, en un periódico se le puede hacer. Dice que es un poco más complicado cuando se habla de otros países porque todavía las leyes no se ajustan. Ahorita con la pandemia, que muchos periódicos fueron online, no se ajustan todavía esas leyes para ver si se puede permitir publicar algo online para también servir a una persona. What else do I need to take in account if I'm going to file for custody of my child?
Well, again, it depends on the situation. Each situation is different, but is the other person going to contest it? Sometimes even an absent parent, if they're served with the complaint for custody, all of a sudden they come out of the woodwork and they want to get involved and they want to fight for custody. So it really depends on, each case. But do you think that there's a possibility that that other parent is going to challenge you for custody? That's something to consider.
Y bueno, la otra cosa es considerar cuáles realmente son los intereses de la otra persona. Si realmente te va a pelear, si va a haber necesidad de ir a corte o si pueden llegar a un acuerdo entre ustedes dos. Si de repente quizás no estuvo presente en la vida del niño y ahora sí va a querer estar presente. Entonces esa otra clase de cosas son las cosas que tienes que tener en cuenta para pedir esto. I'm going to ask a question because I'm not sure what are the laws. In North Carolina, you serve North Carolina and South Carolina, or
just North Carolina for custody purposes?
So what's the rule in North Carolina? Does the father has to be present at the birth for him to be in the birth certificate, or a mother can just add someone to the birth certificate?
No, in North Carolina, the father would have to sign what's called an affidavit of parentage. So it's a legal document that he has to sign acknowledging that he's the father. So a mother could name her child anything. So she could be named Jones and she could give her child a last name of Smith. That has nothing to do with paternity. That's just a name. But in terms of what's going to go in that birth certificate, the father would have to sign off on an affidavit of parentage before his name could be added to the birth certificate.
Okay. So if they're not present, they have no right on the child?
Well, there are legally ways to fix that.
Okay.
The father isn't physically present when it, has not signed that affidavit. That can be corrected a different legal way, but he'd have to be, he's got to sign that affidavit at the birth if he's going to be added to the birth certificate, at the time of birth.
Okay. That's important to know. So what, and I don't know, I mean, if you can answer this question, but this is what I heard lately, right? Well, he has no papers if he asks, or he's illegal. That I know that are horrible words, but that's the way we express, that's the way people talk. If he asks me something, or if he asks for the child or whatever, I would call immigration. How true is that?
Well, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I wanted to backtrack a little bit when you asked me, what does a parent who wants to file for custody need to be thinking about? And my one answer was, will that other parent challenge the parent who's seeking custody? Because I think the other thing that sometimes gets lost in these custody disputes is what's good for the child. And that's the standard that the court is going to consider. It's not, he was bad to be in our relationship and I don't want anything to do with him. It's about what's best for the child. So a parent who has withheld a child from the father or the other parent needs to be mindful that that's never going to look good in the eyes of the court. That here's a parent over here who wants to have a relationship, but the parent who wants full custody is not allowing that. So so something like legal status to suggest that a parent might call immigration because the other parent is illegal is probably going to be more harmful for the child than anybody. And so parents ought to always be thinking about, how is my child going to be impacted by the decisions that I'm making around custody?
This is, sorry, I was going to continue the conversation. Por favor, envíen sus preguntas, si tienen alguna pregunta acerca, estamos hablando de custodia y todo el caso de cuando uno de las parejas no tiene un estatus migratorio, realmente cómo procede. Pero si tú tienes alguna pregunta acerca del divorcio, acerca de manutención, por favor, siéntense libres de mandar un mensajito por aquí, o si no, también llamen directamente a las oficinas que les vamos a compartir los números. La abogada te ayuda a cualquier parte de Carolina del Norte que tú estés. 704-457-5094, 704-457-5094. Lo que estaba diciendo la abogada, que sí existen esas amenazas, ¿no? De déjame de estar preguntando por el niño, déjame de estar diciendo por el niño, porque si no te voy a reportar a migración. Esto es algo que realmente tenemos que considerar y tenemos que pensar. ¿Por qué? Porque el abogado, el juez, no vas a quedar bien ante los ojos del juez si la otra persona habla de amenazas, de que dijiste esto, porque no puedes estar pensando querer tener una relación o no una relación con esta persona si no es acerca del niño. Y esta clase de situaciones y amenazas, pues, ponen en peligro las circunstancias y la salud mental del niño. Entonces, hay que tener mucho cuidado. So we're kind of talking about threats, and because I know the woman, sometimes we, when we don't get what we want, or, we get like that, we threat. And sometimes it's not even about the kids, but I don't want you near me. How do we handle? There's a way to handle that. And does the police get involved? How do, because that's another thing with our community, that sometimes we get scared, like, I don't want the police, I don't want a social worker in my house. How does it really work? What's true and not true in this kind of things?
Well, I mean, if it's more about the two adults who may not have a good relationship, and they don't want the child to get caught in the middle, some things that I suggest, even with some of my clients, is there a third party that both parents know and trust to say, all right, I'm going to drop, Jimmy off at my sister's house, and dad can go to my sister's house and pick him up and have, spend time with him, and just so that the two parents never have to see each other, never have to, talk to each other. But again, that child is still allowed to have a relationship with both parents. So I always encourage, families that are in a situation like that to maybe consider finding a third party who's neutral, but who they're both comfortable with and who knows the child, who can help them with the exchanges or help them work out some of those challenges that they may be facing, in terms of making sure that both parents have a meaningful relationship, but trying to avoid the parent from having to deal with each other.
Yeah, right, yeah. Le preguntaba, bueno, qué tan inteligentes cada vez que nos encontramos para prestarnos a los niños, darnos a los niños las peleas, las amenazas y todo lo demás. Dice, bueno, yo lo que recomiendo es que los padres encuentren a una tercera persona, que los dos le tengan confianza, que los dos tengan buena comunicación para tenerlo como lugar de entrega, ¿no? Como decir, voy a dejar a mi hijo aquí y lo va a recoger su papá ahí y poder hacer ese cambio un poquito menos dramático, porque sabemos que pasa y existe eso, que cada vez que nos vemos, peleamos, discutimos cosas innecesarias y situaciones que los niños no tienen que estar viviendo. What's the custody center? No, visitation center. I have heard something about that in Charlotte.
So they have a center here. I don't know how it's operating during COVID, but in non-COVID times, it's a facility that's opened. I know for sure they're open on Saturdays, and it's where they supervise visits between parents and children. So a lot of times, or not a lot of times, but in some situations, the court will order supervised visits. And so if there's not a third party that both parents, can trust to supervise the visit, there is a facility where they pay people who will just sit around and they watch parents interact with their children. So it is a facility. They charge a minimal fee to the parent who needs to be supervised, but the child gets dropped off and the other parent shows up and they spend an hour or two with the child, and that's how the visit occurs in a supervised setting.
Le preguntaba a la abogada porque yo he escuchado acerca de un centro de visita en Charlotte. Dice que no está segura cómo está funcionando ahorita durante COVID, pero en los tiempos de no COVID está abierto los sábados. Lo que hay es un grupo de personas que son contratadas para supervisar las visitas. Entonces, ¿qué es lo que pasa? Si yo no me llevo muy bien con mi ex partner, entonces puedo llegar ahí donde hay gente viéndonos, cómo nos comportamos, entregamos al niño y el otro papá se puede quedar ahí 1 o 2 horas, convive con el niño y así la transición es más sencilla. Y esto es cuando no conocemos a esa tercera persona que estábamos hablando.
I'm sorry, I wanted to add to that. And a supervised visit is going to be appropriate in only certain situations. So a situation, say, where a parent hasn't seen the child or spent time with the child for a long period of time, months or years, mainly years, it's a way for the child to get reintroduced or introduced to that parent where there's, where it's safe and there are people watching. So you want the child to kind of gradually get to know this other parent. Or it could be appropriate if there are allegations of substance abuse or, things of that nature where you want to have another set of eyes watching the interaction between the parent and child. So most visits are not going to be supervised, but in those instances where the court does want another set of eyes on the child, then this is the kind of setting that is available to parents.
Dice que ella quiere aclarar que usualmente las visitas bajo supervisión es cuando o el niño tiene muchísimo tiempo que no interactúa con su papá o con su mamá, meses, años a veces, y es para que el niño encuentre un espacio donde se pueda sentir a gusto y volver a introducirse a este otro padre, ¿no? O también cuando existe la sospecha o la corte lo ha ordenado por abuso de sustancias, otra clase de situaciones que la corte considere que es apropiado tener ojos extras revisando o supervisando al papá y al niño. Well, this is talking about custody, and we're almost running out of time. But this conversation, I think, is very helpful. It has a lot of information. So I take care of my child. We're separated. We have nothing to do with each other. I take care of the child. And we have never talked about custody. He does visitations. He gets the money every month or whatever. And all of a sudden I said, you know what, I'm going to move. What's the right way and the legal way to do this?
To move? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Like with everything, it's done right. We just don't have a paper of custody. But what are my rights really, as a mother? Can I say, you know what, tomorrow I'm moving somewhere else because I have an offer. Bye. Yeah. Come in and see when I send you your child. What's the right way to do that?
Well, again, I mean, in a situation like that you just described, you're talking about a child who already has a meaningful relationship with the other parent. So what is that going to do for the child if mom, for example, just ups and decides she's going to move across the country and take the child with her? Now the father and son can't have that, constant contact, that meaningful relationship, it's going to be very different. So in a situation like that, the parent will always, again, wants to think about it from what's going to be best for my child. Now, sometimes it is a good idea to move across the country because there's a job offer and there's a great housing and great schools. But I think the first consideration is always going to be is what's going to be best for my child. So that's number one. And I'll let you translate that. And then I'll give you number two.
Dije la abogada, un ejemplo, él y yo estamos separados, yo cuido a mi hijo, él ve al niño los fines de semana, me pasa una manutención, tenemos una relación, no excelente, pero van bien las cosas, no hay una custodia, no hay nada. Pero mañana me ofrecen un súper buen trabajo del otro lado del país y digo, bye, me voy a mudar, que luego hablamos de cómo nos organizamos con el niño. Dice la abogada, que primero que nada se tiene que pensar cuál es el bienestar del niño, porque esto quiere decir que este niño tiene una relación establecida con el otro padre. Entonces, por muy bueno que sea el trabajo, nosotros simplemente no podemos mudarnos del otro lado del país porque así lo consideramos. Primero es el bienestar del niño. ¿Cuál es la salud del niño mentalmente y emocionalmente?
And then the second thing is if the two parents can't agree, meaning the parent who's going to stay behind says, no, I don't want that to happen, then you may end up in court. And the parent who wants to leave is going to have a really compelling reason to explain to the court why it's a good idea for the court to let the parent or the mom, for example, move across the country. And what is the plan for the child to continue to have a meaningful relationship with the father? So you've got to have a real strong reason and be able to convince the court that it's a good idea to move the child, and then also have a plan as to how child and parent, are still going to be able to have a relationship.
Que tienes que tomar en cuenta si la otra persona o el otro padre está de acuerdo con que te mudes así nada más, porque esta clase de decisiones abruptamente te puede llevar a la corte. En la corte vas a tener que convencer o vas a tener que demostrar muy buenas razones o las razones por las que es más importante que te mudes a este otro lugar a que tu hijo siga teniendo esta relación íntima con el otro padre. Así que esa es de las dos cosas que tenemos que tener. So before we go, I just wanted to touch again on the topic of I do not have legal status. Mm-hmm. Should I be afraid to go to court and ask for my rights as parent? Can he just take my child away because I don't have a legal status in the United States?
No, that's I go to court all the time with clients who do not have legal status, and it's never been an issue. In fact, the courts exist for all people who live in this country, so legal status doesn't matter.
Le pregunté una vez más a la abogada que nos aclarara, ¿debería yo de tener miedo de ir a la corte y hacer una petición de patria potestad o pelear la custodia de mis hijos si yo no tengo un estatus legal? Y dice la abogada que no, que realmente ella ha representado muchísimas familias que no tienen un estatus legal y no ha sido un impedimento para que se les den sus derechos como padres. Así que ahí les dejo una vez más el número de teléfono 704-457-5094, 704-457-5094. Por favor, cualquier sugerencia que quisieran que platicáramos con la abogada Nicholson, por favor, mándenos mensajito aquí en privado, comuníquense a la oficina, primera consulta es gratis, 704-457-5094 es el número de teléfono. Y pues el tema estuvo muy interesante el día de hoy. Anything else that we should add about custody?
Well, I always say this when we have these conversations, we could be here all day because it can become so detailed. But again, I think, what you just said and what we can end with is that, if you're residing here in the United States and you have the right to use the legal system of this country to assert your rights, including custody, and don't ever be afraid thinking that because you don't have legal papers that you shouldn't fight for the rights of your children. That is why the legal system exists. I'm here, I give free consultations for any kind of domestic or family law related issues. So when in doubt, always ask an attorney, but don't just sit back and be afraid to do something for the benefit of your children.
Pues repito una vez más la abogada, el sistema legal de los Estados Unidos está para servir a todos, todo el mundo tiene derecho para pelear la patria potestad de su hijo, no tengan miedo de acercarse o de pedir ayuda profesional, la abogada ofrece las consultas gratis para lo que ustedes quieran. El sistema está aquí para servirlos a ustedes, no importa cuál es el estatus legal que tú tienes, así que pidan con ayuda, no tengan miedo de pedir ayuda para el beneficio de sus hijos. Así que ahí está el número de teléfono 704-457-5094, 704-457-5094, es el número de teléfono. Y pues vamos a la próxima vez quizás platicar un poquito qué pasa cuando mi hijo no está nacido aquí en los Estados Unidos. I know that we have to go, but good question that someone sent me, and I was thinking that maybe next time, I'm not sure when it's going to be the next time, but what happened when my child is not a USA born? Can I still fight the same?
Yes. Same. As long as they're here in this country, they have the rights to, utilize our courts. Yes.
Pues no importa si tu hijo no es nacido en los Estados Unidos, mientras ellos viven aquí en los Estados Unidos, tienen derecho a utilizar el sistema de la corte para estos casos familiares. Así que preguntas que tú tengas o algún caso que tú tengas de divorcio, patria, potestad o manutención, llama a la abogada 704-457-5094. Hoy yo estuve traduciendo para la abogada Nicholson, pero ellos tienen personal que habla en español que igual te pueden ayudar para traducir eso. So thank you very much. I was just telling them that today I was translating for you, but you do guys have an excellent bilingual, people that work with you, translators that will help you.
So, someday I'll be able to do this in Spanish, but give me some time.
I'm pretty sure that you have it. You just don't want to do it, but I'm pretty sure that you do. That is there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nicholson. Que tengan un excelente fin de semana. Bye.
Bye-bye.